morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Marty Plum, and I am your host of a Pen and a Napkin podcast. Welcome to a Pen and a Napkin University. Our first course is personal growth and development. Our topic this week is communicating with your players. There is no skill that is more important today in today's game than communication with your players. And when we say communicate, we often think of communication as talking, but we also need to think of communication as listening. That you not only have to communicate and get your message out to your players well, but you also have to listen to your players. So, this video lecture will deal with a variety of different ways and expectations and ideas and thoughts and concepts of working with your players, communicating with your players, one-on-one meetings, what you should be doing, what you should not be doing, and everything in between. Before we talk about communication, we need to understand our players. Here are some important things about our players that we as coaches need to understand. Number one, they want to be able to contribute immediately. They want to feel as if they have a role within your program. They want to do things that are important. They want to be doing activities and skills and drills that they feel like make sense for what is going on out on the floor. Another important thing about today's players, they want immediate feedback. They want to hear you give instruction, criticism, constructive criticism as quickly as possible. If you wait 2-3 days to go through something with them, they don't respond to that nearly as well. They want to be treated as individuals. Today it is much, much different than it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, where everybody was just going to do it for the team. Now there is much more of an individual-driven concept with our players and their goals and their ideas. Another thing they want access to the head coach. They want to be able to go right to the head coach and be able to communicate with them. Now, you create that communication, if you're a teacher, by standing in the hallways and having short side conversations in between classes and stuff like that. But they are going to want to talk to you directly. They want to feel like they have a relationship with you as a head coach. And part of your responsibility as a head coach is to do your best to develop relationships with all of your players, top to bottom, from your worst freshman to your best senior. They want to have a meaningful relationship with you. They want to have meaningful relationships with their teammates, with the assistant coaches, with everybody involved. Kids today are really, really driven by relationships, by cooperative learning, by working together as a group for a greater goal. They want to see measurable growth steps. They want to be able to say, hey, I made 10 three-point baskets on Monday, and by Friday I made 12 three-point baskets. Therefore, I got better. And I'm a better shooter on Friday than I was on Monday. So the more you can chart things, the more you can measure growth, the more you can give them tangible numbers to go by, the better they're going to be. They're willing to learn from their peers, much more than we were willing to learn from our peers during our youth. That is really, really important for young kids today. They want to see results quickly, as we talked about with the measurable growth steps, and they want to see you be innovative, coaches. The stuff that you say, well, this is what I did 30 years ago, and this is a drill that we ran 30 years ago, and there are some aspects of drills that were ran 30 years ago, and players are going to be okay with that, but they also want you to think outside the box. They want you to be innovative. They want you to come up with new ideas and new concepts. For example, at our team camp last week, we did something that I thought was pretty innovative. Each team played a couple of games, and then we brought all our teams into the gym, and we had a bunch of shooting contests between teams. And the kids really, really liked that. Some of the coaches, I'm sure, were like, well, let's just keep going here. Let's keep playing games. But for kids these days, those are things they want to see. It gives individuals an opportunity to shine. It gives teams and players an opportunity to break it down and give individuals success on a bigger stage, which they might not see within the team concept. So you need to constantly be thinking outside of the box. Now, why do we need to think that way? Because teenagers' minds today are different than what our minds were when we were their age. There's a lot of different statistics out there about teenagers and the way that their minds work. For example, 73% of teenagers are on technology within an hour of waking up every single day. Think about that. 3 out of every 4 kids are on the internet or are checking social media or checking their email within an hour of waking up every day. Another thing that's different about teenagers today, they are multitaskers. They can do 2, 3, 4 different things at a time. They want to get as much done as quickly as they can by doing multiple things at the same time. You have kids that'll listen to music, have Netflix on while they're doing their homework. And our minds from our generations don't really work in that same fashion. They expect flexibility. They're used to having flexibility. They want to, for example, with online learning, they're used to going to class when they feel like going to class. And so we have to be flexible with them if you want to have positive relationships with your kids. Now, there's certain things that need to be set in stone and you need to draw a line in the sand on, but you also need to give when you are capable of giving and be flexible when you are able to be flexible, because your kids want and need and expect that. By and large, they expect that flexibility from you. Everything is on their phones. Very little is done by email, even less is done by actually talking on their phones. We have these phones, and the kids today don't use phones to talk on the phones. They use them to text, they use them to Snapchat, they use them for any other types of social media. So if you need to get a hold of your kids, if you want to communicate well with your kids, use text, use social media. Use it smartly, though. Obviously, there are certain lines that you should not be crossing. Keep it very, very professional, but everything should be done in that way. The biggest thing that our teenagers are into today, they're used to TikToks for 30 seconds or 1 minute. They're used to watching YouTube clips for a couple of minutes at a time. That is how they garner their information. That's how they gather it. And so for us to say, watch this 26-minute video on rebounding, they're going to tune us out. They're very big on 30-second interactions. And so you have to adjust your communication style with your players in order for them to really understand and connect with you. You have to connect on their level in large part, so that when it comes time where they need to connect with you on your level and what's important to you, they will have known that you have given up a lot of your communication style for their good. Now it's time for you guys to communicate on my level. Now that you have a good idea of how your players think and how they want to be communicated with, now you can start stepping into your own standards and your own expectations. I think it's really important, and unless you've gone through a season where you don't have great team chemistry, you don't really understand this, but it is so important. There is nothing too big or too small when it comes to team chemistry. You have to have a situation. Not everybody has to like each other, but the players have to respect the coaches. The coaches have to respect the players. The players need to respect the players. The coaches need to respect the coaches. We, as a species, are selfish. Human beings are by nature selfish. And it's hard to find players and coaches that are truly going to give into the team concept. But you need to hammer that, you need to hammer that, you need to hammer that. And then continue to build on it. And once you have it, you hold on to it, and you keep reinventing it every single year. This gives you an opportunity to give your players your expectations. For me, I have 4 or 5 big expectations. Number one, the most important thing that I can ask of my players is to be a great teammate. That's something from Bruce Brown right there. Have your players be a great teammate and show examples of great teammates. Point it out when players are great teammates, whether that's on film, whether that's in practice. So stop practice right there and you say, hey, Look at Joe over there. Joe was a great teammate here by doing this and this and this. Point that out. Let your players know when they are being great teammates and show great examples. Maybe you show stuff from a college basketball game or professional basketball game, both positive and negative displays of being a great teammate. Try to keep the emphasis on the positive and try to minimize the negative. Second expectations that I have of my players: do your job. You got to do your job. As a player, whatever role you've been asked to do, and we're going to talk about roles here in a little bit, but whatever role you've been asked to do, you've got to do your job. And that is your job to do for the good of the team. So, straight from Bill Belichick, do your job. And if you do your job, and if everybody does their job, then we collectively will do our job. Third expectations that I have of my players: pay attention to the details. The details are so important. We don't call them big things or small things. We call, because they're all things, we call them details. We try to change our vocabulary and emphasize the details of things. So we talk about details and doing things the right way. The fourth thing: put the team first. Try to take your own personal goals and ideas and concepts. Now, we need players that are, to a degree, selfish, and we need kids that need to score, for example. We have kids that need to be great defenders. But you try to take that and turn it in a different way. Hey, who's going to lead us in charges this season? Who is going to lead us in personal touches, i.e. high fives and fist pounds and things like that? But you need to put the team first. And sometimes you need to subjugate your team or your individual goals for the good of the team. The last thing that I ask of my kids is to work as hard as you can. If you work as hard as you can, then we live with the result. The hardest thing to coach is a team that just refuses to work hard, to meet your expectation level when it comes to their hard work and their dedication. That's a hard thing to fight. And those are our most frustrating teams to coach. Overall, if you have kids that are great teammates, that are concentrating on the details, and are working as hard as they can, then whatever happens, happens. And for the most part, you have to live with that. Because if your kids give you those three things, they are essentially maxing out for you. And you need to communicate that with your players. When they are maxing out for you, you tell them, hey, I appreciate you maxing out. I appreciate what you did the other night at West High. And give them that positive reinforcement, because the more you reinforce those positive demonstrations, the better they're going to be at what they're doing, instead of emphasizing the negative things and beating them down in that regard. So emphasize your expectations and establish your standards. Now, what are your standards? We talk about rules and we talk about standards. It's better to have standards instead of rules. If you emphasize standards instead of rules, because rules you have to enforce. And if somebody breaks a rule, you are responsible for some sort of punishment. Whereas you set a standard of how we do things, they either meet it or they don't meet it, and they do it as a whole, as a group. So it's important, I think, that you communicate with your team how and what standards they want to meet. And I think you give your teams opportunities to create their own standards. You have your own standards for yourself. Talk about the standards that you have for yourself as a coach, and then try to explain how your standards as a coach should try and be met by them as players. And how can you replicate the standards that you have for yourself as a coach to give to your team? I think it's important that you sit down and you iron those things out. You ask them, for example, here's some good questions that you ask your teams here. What's important to you? What's important to this team this season? One of the things that I had with my team last year, they essentially said, we're tired of people making fun of us in the hallway. We're tired of being kind of the laughing stock of the school. And I took that and I said, okay, what are you going to do to change that? And so I took that standard. Okay, let's establish a standard of, we just want to be respected. Okay, how do you earn respect? And we went through the steps of what do you need to do to earn respect. What do you want to accomplish? That's an easy one. What do you want to accomplish this season? What are tangible accomplishments that you want to have this season? Here's kind of an intangible one. What kind of team do you want to be? I think you kind of say that as an example. When we're playing East High, what do we want East High fans to say about us as West High when they watch us play? How do you want our opponents and our opponents' fans to view us when they're done playing against us? What kind of team do we want to be? What do we need to do to achieve these goals? Here's another thing for the good of your program. Who do you need to beat in order to reach where you want to go? Who's your red letter dates? When I was at my previous position, we picked out one team, one school in particular, and we said, that's our North Star. That's who we're chasing after. That's who we want to go after. And that is who we chased for years and years. Now, we caught them within a couple of years, and we got to the point where it was pretty much a 50-50 game. But we emphasized it. Without a doubt, we emphasized that opponent and that program because it wasn't out of hatred or anger or jealousy. It was out of respect. That's who we want to be like. So who's going to be your red letter dates? Who do you see setting the standard on your schedule that you want to achieve? And that gives your kids an opportunity to look at that. Oh, that's the type of team we want to be. What do you want to stand for? What do you want to stand for as a team? What do you want to be known for? Pick out one or two things. When you think of Michigan State and Michigan State men's basketball, what do you think of? You think of rebounding. You think of rebounding and dominating the glass, okay? What do you want to stand for? What do you want to be known as? What is going to be your North Star? What is going to be the thing that's going to drive your program forward? So establish those standards. Create standards instead of rules, okay? When you need to have rules, make sure that they are consistently, fairly, and firmly enforced. You can't penalize the 12th kid for being 5 minutes late, and then when your best player walks in and they're 5 minutes late, you have to enforce the same rules for that kid. Too often we look at it and we go, well, that's our best player, and if our rule is if you're late for a meeting, and then you're going to sit out the first half of the first quarter if you're late for a meeting. Well, if you're going to do that to your fifth starter, you sure as heck better do that to your first starter. You're going to lose in the long run you may gain in the short term, but you're going to lose in the long run if you enforce your rules like that. You're going to lose your team. And there are so many examples of coaches losing their teams by enforcing rules in that way. The thing that you ask for, again, to max out at whatever your standard of excellence, that's what it is. But put those standards into place and clearly communicate with your team and have your players drive your standards within your team. One of the most important things that I think you can do as a coach to increase communication with your players is individual meetings. Now, the first thing I'll say about individual meetings is if you schedule individual meetings with one player, you need to schedule individual meetings with every player in your program. You just don't do it with one kid or two kids or you're just your varsity kids. You need to schedule individual meetings with every player in your program. I think it's also important that you schedule these meetings at least twice a season. Once before the season starts, once after the season is over. I think the meeting before the season starts is a lot about roles and expectations going into the season and where you see them at. And you're very open. You need to be very open. You need to be very transparent about their role and where they're at. And we're going to talk about roles here in a little bit. But it's important to be open and transparent about those things. After the season, I think it's important that you talk about things that they did well, talk about one or two things that you want them to work on in the off season. No more than two things that you want them to work on in the off season. One, preferably, two at the most. And where you're kind of seeing where they stand going into your summer season. Now, when you get into these meetings, I think it's important that you prioritize certain things. Number one, before you even start talking about basketball, you talk about a couple of other things. You talk about their family. Talk about their family, talk about their parents, brothers, sisters, how's everything going, so forth and so on, especially if you've been at a place for a while and you're familiar with the family. Second thing is you talk about school and how things are going in school. How's classes going? What teachers do they like? What courses are their favorites? So forth and so on. Then you get into the basketball. I think that it's really, really important that you prioritize things in that way. And I think it's really important that you understand that every player has a story. Every player has their own story, and they want you to understand their story. They want you to understand their goals. They want you to understand their aspirations. Now, we cannot accommodate every player's and every parent's goals and aspirations. It is just literally impossible for us to do that. However, we can know about that story, and when a player may act a certain way, it gives us a baseline, it gives us an understanding so that when we need to communicate about things, you are able to do that in a much simpler fashion. It's also important during these meetings that sometimes we as coaches want to fix things, we want to talk, we want to dominate the conversation, and I'm no different because I want to help these kids achieve what they want to achieve. But sometimes it's just important that we sit back and listen. They want to tell us their story. We need to understand their story. I think it's also important to help out with these conversations, to have your players fill out a questionnaire. I've attached in this week's topic our questionnaire that we give our kids, and they're pretty detailed. There's 14, 15, 16 different things on there. And we're not going to go through everything during those individual meetings. Otherwise, we'd be in every meeting for an hour, and that is impossible for us to do. But what it does is it gives us a baseline. If we see a kid that is writing a lot about a certain topic, especially if it's something a little bit more personal, we know that something's on their mind, and that gives us an opportunity to go down that lane with that player and have them understand and have them understand that we understand that something is bothering them and that we want to help them out with that topic. When it comes to leadership, and you're often going to have players say, Coach, I want to be a leader this season. And that's a great, great thing to have happen. You need to have a tangible leadership program that your players can understand. For our team last season, we did John Gordon's The Energy Bus, and we read the book and we discussed it. And it wasn't just our varsity kids or it wasn't just our seniors, it was our entire program. I think that it's important that you develop leaders from the time they enter your program to the time that they leave their program. Very often, a trap that we fall into as coaches, especially as high school coaches, is our kids become seniors and we go, okay, you're the leaders now. Well, have we taught them how to lead? Or just do we expect them to lead because they are seniors? We need to teach them how to lead, just like we teach them how to do a one-count jump stop, or how we teach them how to rebound, or how we teach them to run our offenses and defenses. We need to teach them how to be leaders. And you start that when they're seventh graders, when they're eighth graders, when they're freshmen, and all the way through. And that's going to be a process. That's going to be a process. Your team leaders need to understand that leadership is not for the weak, that sometimes you're going to have to broach topics and you're going to have to confront teammates that sometimes it's very difficult to do. But if you really want to be a leader, that's what leadership truly, truly is. Along with that, we need to create active followers. We need to have followers that will respect our leaders and that they understand why these leaders are doing what they are, because you've clearly communicated that within your program and your expectations and your standards. In these meetings, you'll often have a freshman that says, my goal is to play JV this year. Or a freshman or sophomore that says, I want to be on varsity, or I want to start on varsity, or that type of thing. I think it's important that you explain that this is not as easy as one would say that is. Now, you're going to have that special player every once in a while where they do make it look a lot easier than what it should be. But for a lot of kids, when they move up levels, it's not as easy as what they think it is. I think you need to tell them how they're going to, how they need to adapt to the game at the next level. If they're going from junior high to freshman ball, if they're going from freshman to sophomore, all right, if you're a freshman trying to play JV or varsity, if you're a sophomore trying to play varsity, how they need to adapt their game. They need to know that they need to toughen up, that this is going to be much more physical than they've ever played before. You need to do more than just put the ball in the basket. Yeah, you can shoot it, and more often than not, how do we move kids up within our programs? It's the kids that can put the ball in the basket, because that's the goal of the game, is putting the ball in the basket. Now what are you going to do other than scoring the basketball? You need to buy into the team concept. You need to buy into the team concept. It's not just about you. It's just not about you going from freshman to JV or varsity. It's not just about you being a sophomore and making the jump to varsity. What are you going to do to make others around you better? You have to be willing to compete. You have to stay hungry. Sometimes a kid's goal is to be that freshman that plays on JV, and when they achieve that goal, they get stuck because they've achieved their goal. What are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? Are you going to be a role player on the JV, or are you going to be the best player on the JV? That should be your standard. Now, once you're the best player on the JV, what are you going to do to get yourself on the varsity and get yourself varsity minutes? And you keep moving those goalposts, and you teach those kids how to compete. The biggest thing you can teach them, and the biggest thing you can do with them, especially your better players, is to get them comfortable being uncomfortable. Winning and being great is not easy to do. It's very uncommon. And in order to do that, you have to make yourself uncomfortable, and you need to have your players understand that. Also, during these meetings, it's a great time to talk about their standards and what kids want from your program. And we talk about negotiables versus non-negotiables. And again, we talked about the way that the mind of teenagers works today. This is a great opportunity for you to talk about things and give your players things that are not important to you, okay? You hold on. The non-negotiables are the things that are important to you. So, for example, non-negotiables are sprinting back on defense, competing, your effort, your communication level, how we behave on bus rides. Those are non-negotiables in a lot of different ways, okay? But what are negotiables? How long are we going to practice today? How's our legs today? How are we feeling today? What music do we want to listen to in practice today? I've said it multiple times on my podcast. I let my kids listen to music in practice. They can listen to whatever they want to listen to as long as they're great teammates, they play really hard, and they take care of the details, they're concentrating. If they don't do those three things, they know that they're going to listen to music and listen to whatever they want to listen to, and I got to put up with it. They also know that if they don't live up to those standards, it's my stuff. And those little things, those little negotiables, and honestly, I could give a crap less what we're listening to, but I know it's important to them. And just to prove a point, I don't have to yell, kick, or scream. I just put on my music during practice, or I change the music during practice because we're not, or I take the music away. And that gets their attention back. I don't have to yell. I don't have to confront. I just say, cut the music. And that's a negotiable that you win every single time, but they think it's a big deal. How long are we going to practice? Talk to your kids about how long we need to practice. How's our legs feeling? I've canceled practices before because my kids come up to me and say, Coach, we are just wiped out. We are really, really tired. We really need an extra day off. I've done that before, especially if you're in a situation where you don't play for 3 or 4 days. All right, let's take an extra day off. But you come back in, and instead of practicing Monday through Thursday to get ready for Friday, all right, let's practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But they got to be great practices. And you earn that trust through those one-on-one contacts and those one-on-one situations. You also talk about your expectations and what you expect from your players. For example, for me, here's 5 big things that I really expect from my players. I expect loyalty, I expect honesty, I expect fairness, treat me fairly, I expect trust, and I expect consistent effort. Those are the things that I'm very blunt, and I'm up forward with those things. And I tell my players, that's what I expect of you. And all of those things, every player can control. They can control how loyal they are to the program. They can control how honest they are to the program. All of those things. You need to ask your player, what are your expectations of your coaches? Be open about that. Ask your players. Take 5 or 10 minutes and just say, what do you expect of me? What do you need from me? And that's going to help you communicate with your players, because you may not be doing something for them, and they say, Coach, we need this from you. And you may not realize that you're not doing that, and now you know. And now you know. And now they appreciate it. They feel like they have a say in that. Again, our generation now, these kids these days, they want to have a say in these things. And it's just taking 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 10 minutes here to communicate and have them understand that stuff. That's going to take your team to the next level. As you communicate these things, as you communicate these standards and these expectations in these individual meetings, I also think it's important that you know what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. You have to be willing to fight for your culture. You need to be willing to fight for your culture even if it costs you a win. If you need to sit your best player for those 4 minutes at the beginning of the game, and you get down 10-0, you put them in and you end up losing by 6, you have to be willing to fight for that. You have to, before you even take this job, especially as a head coach, you need to know what you're willing to do to give up games, and you need to be, even further than that. What are you willing to be fired for? And communication with your players can help you figure those things out. And if you have a player that says, well, coach never told us that, you say, no. We talked about this. We talked about it in your individual meeting. And here's another thing I would think about doing when you have these individual meetings. Take notes. Write these things down. And when you're done with your individual meetings, have your players summarize what you've talked about in these meetings. Hey, Jimmy, what's the important concepts that you remember from this meeting? What have we talked about here today? And you have this documented. So when that player or that parent says, you never told Jimmy about his role, and he thought he would be the 5th starter, and now he's hardly even playing. No. I told Jimmy that I look at him behind, Frank, Pete, Joe, and Ralph, and he was never really penciled in as a starter. I was very clear with that. I thought he was probably our 8th or 9th player. Here's our notes from our meeting on October 22nd that state these things. And you tell your players, hey, while we're talking here, please, I'm writing a few things down. Don't worry about it. I'm just writing down what we're talking about here today. And the kids will get that. The kids will do that. I've done that many, many times before. The best thing you can do in these individual meetings is align their personal goals with the goals of the team. If you can take these meetings and align their personal goals, I want to be a starter, I want to try and average this many points, I want to get this many rebounds a game, so forth and so on, and you align that with the goals of the team, then you've succeeded in your individual meetings. Last major topic we want to talk about in this course, in this topic, is players' roles and playing time. Now, here's 2 great quotes that I think are terrific when it comes to playing time and coaching. From Shaka Smart, he asks his players, does our relationship depend on how much I play you? Really, really good concept. How much does our relationship depend on your playing time? All right. Another one here from Brad Stevens. My door is always open to talk about playing time. If you want to talk about playing time, be prepared for the truth. And that's another thing that we need to handle as coaches and handle it well. We need to be truthful, we need to be honest, we need to be open about kids' playing time. I think the number one thing that you tell kids when it comes to playing time is put me in a situation where I can't take you off the floor. Now, very often, especially at the high school level, we have a few kids that can score. We have quite a few kids that can defend. But it's hard to find kids that can do both, the 2-way players. And I think that's a great way of saying it to your kids. Put me in a situation where I can't take you off the floor when it comes to playing time. Now, we talked about roles, and we talked about meetings, and we talked about discussing with your players and having these meetings and explaining them before the season starts. Here's your role. This is where I see you coming in as. During the off season, you have the same meeting. This is where I kind of see you at right now. But hey, I think the thing that's different, or that it's the same with both. This can change. This can definitely change. I would say in my 25 years of coaching, the same lineup that we had on game 1 was essentially the same lineup that we had game 25 or 30. Maybe happened 7 or 8 times, maybe 1/3 of the time. Usually, with most teams, there's some sort of evolution as the season goes along because of injury, because of illness, because of just chemistry issues and the way teams play together, or the way players play together. You're going to have an evolution in your team, and you need to emphasize that to your players, and you need to point those things out to your players. Now, when it comes to roles, we ask 4 things of our players. When we talk about roles, we ask for 4 things. Know your role. Now, that's my job. That's your job. Tell your players their role. Be open, be transparent, be honest about it. This is your role. This is, if you do these 2, 3, 4 things, this is going to lead to great playing time for you, and it's going to lead to success for our team. That's your job. Your job is to let them know what their role is. Now, 2, 3, and 4, that's on them. Number 2, the second thing, they have to accept that role. Okay, I accept that I've been asked to be a great screener a great rebounder, somebody that's going to make free throws, so forth and so on. Third thing is embrace. Embrace that role. I'm going to be the best screener that coach has ever seen. I'm going to be the best rebounder that coach has ever seen. I'm going to make free throws at a clip that coach has never seen. I'm going to embrace that, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do that. I'm going to be the best at this. And then the last thing is excel. Excel at that role. Okay? Do it to the best of your ability. Sometimes we say fulfill, but I like excel better. So when it comes to roles, emphasize these 4 things. Know, accept, embrace, and excel at your role. Now, one of the things that we do, not only do we do this in their individual meetings, but here's something that I took from Doc Rivers that we've done that has really helped with roles. We call it roll call. And probably 2 times a season, we take an extended amount of time, usually an extra 10 to 15 minutes, and we go around the room. And I will look my players dead in the eye in front of the whole team. Hey, Mary, I love what you're doing here and here. These are the things that you're doing well. For you to keep doing well, for us to do better as a team, we need you to do this. Can you do this for us? And I make the kids look me dead in the eye and say, yeah, coach, I can do that. Okay? So that there is no miscommunication. There is no misunderstanding between the players and the coaches, and everybody witnesses this. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with being very open and honest and transparent. That's about as open and honest and transparent as you can be with your team, where you're sitting there and you are literally roll calling this out, players 1 through 10, 12, 15, however many you have, to go through that as a team, to get them to understand that, to keep everybody on the same page. When we talk about roles, we often talk about roles in the sense of a movie and movie credits. Here's the stars of the show. And there could only be so many stars of the show. But look how many people it takes to support those stars within that. And that is a great example that we use to help our players understand their roles and the role that they are expected to fill. Not everybody is going to be the star of the show. On most teams, 1 or 2 players are going to be the stars, and everybody else is a supporter of those stars. But everybody's role is important. The star doesn't look good unless the cameraman does their job and the gaffer holds the microphone in the spot that it's supposed to be at to pick up the audio, and the special effects folks do the great things to make it look really, really cool in the movie. There's so many roles, and every role is important. The important thing is the final product. And so we use that as an example with our kids. Another really important thing to kids is the starting lineup. Every one of these kids wants to start. Every one of these kids wants to play a lot. When you make a change in the starting lineup, I think it's really, really important that, especially if it's a player who has started a decent number of games and you are taking them out of the starting lineup for the first time, I think it's really, really important that you pull that kid aside for a minute or 2 and you say, hey, Freddie, hey, you're doing a good job, but I think we're going to go with Pete on Friday night. Now, hey, we're going to need you to be ready to go off the bench. Your role's changing a little bit here for tonight. We're going to see how this works. We're going to see how this looks. But we need you to be ready, okay? Now, it doesn't need to be anything long. It doesn't need to be anything massive or drawn out or anything like that. But you need to soften that blow for that kid. Kids have egos. We have egos. And you need to keep that kid engaged in your program and with your team. So I think it's really, really important that you take that extra 30 seconds or a minute to pull that kid aside so they're not caught off guard, so they're not surprised when you announce that starting lineup, when you announce that George is going to be guard number 32 for East High instead of Fred on Friday night, that the other kids understand that, and that it's a measure of respect. It's a measure of respect as well. We just sometimes think, they just got to adjust to it. Well, baloney. How would you feel if you were department head and then you were demoted out of department head and nobody told you, just somebody showed up that day and said, hey, I'm department head now. The principal told me I'm department head, and the principal never took the time to explain to you why you're not department head anymore, okay? So that's really important. I think you take that time, and again, it's about communication. And you may have some frustration. You may have some anger. You give them the option, hey, if you want to talk about it a little bit more after practice or at some point here, let me know. My door's open. And you can't expect them to be. You don't want them to be happy, because if they're really, really happy about it, they're probably not the competitive kid that you need to win anyway. All right? So I think that's really, really important. It's important to emphasize when it comes to roles to be a star in your role. Be a star in your role. And again, we talked about the movie credits example. Being a star in your role is so important to your team, and you're going to need a little bit of everything along the way. Not everybody can excel at everything, so be a star in your role. Now, if you have a kid that says, Coach, what can I do to get more minutes? What can I do to get more minutes? Okay, and this is the 99 percenters. These are the kids that are just not overwhelmingly athletic, that they just don't have the physical skills. What are 3 things that they can control to get more playing time? Number 1, know the game. High basketball IQ. Emphasize being smart, taking care of the ball. You don't have to win the game for us, but don't lose the game for us. I think that's a great place to start. Hey, take care of the ball. Rebound. Know where you're supposed to be. Screen well. Run the plays effectively. Second thing, be really, really competitive. Know that kid, if there's a 50-50 ball on the floor, they're going to get it for you. If there's a loose ball, they're going to go after it. They're going to take a charge, which ties us into the third thing, which is toughness. Being tough, being physically tough, boxing people out, driving people out, being mentally tough, playing through mistakes, not overanalyzing one mistake, and one mistake leads to another mistake. So those are some things that you can talk to your kids about: their roles, communication, and being competitive, and what they need to do to get more minutes or to get themselves back into the starting lineup. Coaches, I hope you've enjoyed this video on communication with your players. It's our lecture on this topic within this course, personal growth and development. I'm looking forward to our video chat this week. We'll let you know in our comments and our discussion board what time our video chat is going to be. Looking forward to having really, really good discussion points on our topics this week. Coaches, as always, let's hone our craft one day at a time.